I'm joined now by Matthew Holmes. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief of Public Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Matthew, good to see you again. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Thanks for having me, David.
Stephen Guilbeault was on the show yesterday critical of this, saying the government's using a sledgehammer where they could be using a scalpel. How would you characterize the change they're proposing here?
Well, I think this is a long time coming. We've had a system, and even when the Major Projects Office was first announced, the Canadian Chamber was a little cautious in our celebration of that, because we felt that this was cherry picking certain projects for a win here, or for a concierge service by the federal government, when in fact there are hundreds of other projects that need to get done across this country, and they're facing just this morass of regulatory review, slow process. Some of these mining projects and others can take upwards of 17 years to get to an approval. And what happens with that sort of situation? Investment goes away. And in a government that's trying to attract foreign investment and get big projects started in this country for the good of the economy, the good of communities, we need to have some of that confusion go away. And what this is proposing is one review, whether that's across 5 different federal departments or 11. There's going to be one federal review where they all come together for that.
Right, because I know one of the criticisms of C5, I mean, look, some people thought it was too powerful and, forced through major projects, but others that it created an uneven playing field, that if you weren't handpicked to go to the Major Projects Office, you still had to deal with all the regulation. This seems to flatten that, but as a result, it's actually potentially quite a bit more significant and broader than what we saw with C5.
But it's what we need. And so by NRCan, Natural Resource Canada's own estimate, we have over 500 major projects in the country representing $632 billion that are underway or planned in the next 10 years. And there's 15 or so, 20 maybe, from the major projects. So there's over 500 that need to get going, and they need that sort of certainty that this provides. Right now, we can send a Canadian around the moon and back in less time and with more certainty than we can get some major project built in this country.
Right, about 3% of the projects on the books go to the Major Projects Office. Okay, so it's all about speeding things up, but to do that, it means flattening some regulations. And the pushback from some environmental groups, and indeed a former environmental minister, is that this potentially quashes a lot of the progress and standards that were made there, and the concern is that this could subject a lot of these things to legal challenges, like happened under the previous Harper government when they tried to get things going. Do you see any legal risk in what is being proposed here as potential obstacles to projects?
Well, David, I don't even play a lawyer on TV, so
Gotcha.
but what I do see here is let's talk about the numbers. So this isn't necessarily flattening regulation. It's flattening regulatory review by multiple departments of the same project. And so what's being proposed, both federal and provincial governments, but also within the federal family, is one review for one project. And so I think that's what's important. When we stand back and look at the number of federal regulations in this country, there are approximately 349,000 federal regulations. That's not even provincial and municipal yet.
Sure.
That's 349,000 federal regulations as of 2025. They're growing at a compound rate of over 2% a year. So regulations in this country are growing faster than our GDP. And we need to find a better way to get things done in this country. And this is going to be one of the ways to do that.
So flattening the review processes, so like, that would normally, each fisheries would do a review, environment would do a review, NRCan would do a review. But each of those departments exists for a specific reason. So is there a risk in losing some of that expertise, or losing some of the stringency of a review in the name of speed, where maybe you don't get the same level of oversight that you might need or might want?
Well, I think that depends on who's involved in the project. You want the right officials at the table. You want the right information at the table. But it doesn't mean the laws go away. Nobody's like pushing away the environmental standards. In fact, the discussion paper and the press release from the government says very clearly, without compromising environmental standards, without changing the duty to engage with Indigenous peoples in the country. And so I think those are very clearly put out there. It doesn't mean that that's going away, but it means you have to have the right people, the right information at the table.
Right. Well, the courts wouldn't let you get away on the Indigenous consultation, so you have to do that no matter what. The environmental policies is a different thing because that's a policy choice. But there are certain measures in here that seem to maybe let them get away from that a little bit. Like they talk about creating, the government does, economic zones where projects of all kinds could be considered pre-approved. And there's no real explanation or clarity on that. And we know Doug Ford tried to do that in Ontario with, I think it was Bill 4, where areas could be where projects were just exempt from certain requirements in provincial law. How do you interpret that? Because there's been no real explanation on that yet from the government and what they're considering there.
There's a few different paths we could take on this one. I think when I look at that, we're all galvanized right now with the Strait of Hormuz and the sort of discussion around the choke point in global trade. Well, the reality is Canada's full of its own choke points, and these are choke points of our own making, whether that's rails, whether that's ports, whether that's our connectivity, whether it's the movement of people and goods writ large to meet our trading partners at Tidewater and around the world. And we can't get that stuff done without saying it's time to expedite. And so what that corridor may be, or that federal economic zone, is saying, if we're going to put a highway or a rail bed in, we're also going to run some cable. We're going to run a pipeline.
Transmission lines. That's
transmission lines, east to west electrical connectivity. All of our infrastructure goes to the south right now. We need to go east to west and north. And we can't do that. We can't lose this window because this is a generational opportunity.
Yeah, if it's limited to that, it makes a lot of sense. But there's parts where it says industrial site. So, I mean, that could mean any number of things. But could that just mean accelerating mine expansion? Or if you have a port and you want to expand the port, it wouldn't need to go through another process? I mean, how do you envision that maybe coming out in practice here?
We'll have to see in the details of the consultation. I mean, that's the good news here. This is the announcement of a consultation, and we're already debating what needs to be in the sort of final product. But I think we're going to see some of that come out a little bit more over the next month. I think our hope would be that there's an efficiency where if you have a project and you are at the point of having all the information on the table, you bring it to the federal government, there is a one window for you to go through to say, here's our information, please signal to us whether this will have a blessing at the end of a year. And that's when the capital decisions get made, because we need capital formation in this country, which will ultimately develop into a GDP boost, which will mean that our cost, that our budgetary pressures, our deficit is going down.
Yeah, and this is where, reducing the number of contact points makes a ton of sense. I wonder about the ability to execute on this. And this is where, as a final point, it's a one-year decision process, but it's still kind of a two-year process. That if I'm a proponent and I come to see you, I've got a year to basically get my final information together. And once I get that done, I'm promised an answer within a year. Is that achievable at the speed that government currently, like a lot has to change for the government to be able to do all of this flattening of reviews across multiple departments and agencies into one access point to one decision in 1 year? What kind of a culture and logistics change do we need to see for that to work?
It is a change. It is a pace change, it's a culture change, and it's one that Canadians need to make right now. We have this generational window. We had Dr. Fatih Birol from the International Energy Agency in last week, and he spoke about the last big energy crises of the 1970s. The one that we're facing right now is bigger than all of them together. And that hasn't really caught up with people, especially not in Canada and the United States, where we're relatively buffered. But the rest of the world, they're feeling this right now. And this is a generational moment where we can start building and retooling our economy. And it will require a pace change. It will require investment in defense. It will require big structural projects that we haven't made for generations in this country. But they have long tails that give back to our communities and give back to our economy. And that, I think, is what this government's trying to do.
Look, Europe, the Gulf states, Asia, getting absolutely hammered by what's happening. You know, double-digit GDP drops, energy shortages. Like you can see, like the self-reliance that North America has does protect it. But just as a quick final point, what could this unlock? If this works per year, what sort of change could this make to capital, GDP, projects going forward?
I don't have a good number for you on that, but it's significant. It really is. And it's not just what it could unlock in a year, it's what it could unlock for generations of communities across this country, in the north, east and west. This is really transformative if we can get it done. If you look at all of the things that the major projects that have been sort of hinted at in videos and in speeches of late, you know, we're talking about the St. Lawrence Seaway, we're talking about the Transcontinental Railway, we're talking about big things that made this country. And when we have international experts in energy coming to us and saying, the world needs Canada, when we have everybody coming to us and saying, all the critical minerals you've got, they're deep underground. What are you doing with those? Because whether it's clean tech and the future of transition economy, or whether it's the defense industrial base, or the future of space and telecommunications, we're going to need that for AI, for everything we're building right now as a species, as a world. Canada is at this incredible intersection right now. And if we miss this window, shame on us.
Matthew Holmes, Executive Vice President, Chief of Public Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Always appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for the time, David.